How's it going, YouTube? Coming in today with another video, and today, guys, the video is going to be the Maliss guide. And I wanted to make this video because I feel like I've been hearing from everyone that the deck is really frustrating to play against, is really frustrating to play. Like, how do you play under Lancia? What are the different tech options? What are the choke points? What are the lists looking like? What's the best variant? I've been hearing all these questions, so I'm going to make this video to answer all those and more. So if you haven't already checked out my sponsors over at Imperium, Dragonshield, Gem, Cloud, RW, and Grimoire, definitely go ahead and do so, all down below in the description. Also, subscribe to the channel. If you really like the competitive content, I appreciate each and every one of you. I want to be one of the larger YouTubers in the scene. It'd be such an amazing time because the second that happens, I can start doing content full-time, only focus on this, and give you the best top quality content that I possibly can. But still going to do that as much as I can on my way there. Subscribe to the channel, helps me out a lot, costs nothing to you, and without further ado, let's hop right on into the Maliss guide. So you have 3 monsters in the deck. They're all really good, but my favorite thing about them is the fact that they're also extenders, because once you summon them, you also can banish them, pay 300, and bring them back to the board once per turn, which is really solid. The one thing that you really want to keep note of, though, you don't want to waste the banish effects too early. You want to make sure that you're using them at a proper time, because if you don't have to use them right away, then you can save the monster being an extender for later. So a lot of times you'll see people go like Dormouse, banish a White Rabbit come back, set TB11, and then they'll go the 2 into Haggard banish the Dormouse, summon back the Dormouse, and then make like a Red Ransom to add your field spell, and then you can like TB11 away your Red Ransom, right? So that's a really common line that you'll see, which is really strong, but if you can, you want to make sure that you can at least save one of the names. That's why people usually use Chessie last, to really make sure that you have that later on in your turn, right? And that's really good if you hard open like a field spell. You can always add another field spell off Red Ransom, then bring Chessie to the board, and then use Chessie to banish the other field spell and draw 2. So a lot of drawing that happens in this deck, but they're all very strong. The White Rabbit sets 1, the Dormouse will banish 1 from deck, the Chessie will banish 1 from hand, and then Pot of Greed. So they're all really strong in their own regard, but they all have their own effect too. They all will have an additional effect based on pointing to a Maliss Link monster, and it works like Sub-Terror, where it doesn't have to be your Maliss Link monster. It can be your opponent's, so that's one thing you want to keep in mind. The White Rabbit, as long as a Maliss Link monster is involved, will say no battle damage to you. The Dormouse will protect Maliss Link monsters from card effects, so like Regeki, and then the Chessie will actually banish the monsters destroyed by the Maliss Link monster. So pretty crazy. They're all very good effects. They're like the secret effects, right? But I think they're all really cool for that, and they all have 3 effects. We already know cards with 3 effects are typically pretty good. Talking about 3 effects, let's talk about the 3 Link monsters. Red Ransom is a really powerful card. This one's going to allow you to add a Maliss spell, which is only the field spell, which telegraphs the fact that we're going to get another spell because it just says Maliss spell, not a field spell, which is really cool. I'm looking forward to that down the road. But it adds the field spell, and then if it's banished, you can pay 900, special summon it back, and then you can banish a Cyrus from deck, which is usually like Dotscaper, but if you need to get to one of your other main deck names, you can do that too. They all share the same effect where you can pay 900 and bring them back. The White Binder will let you draw a card when that happens, and the Cryptor will just double its attack when that happens. The White Binder allows you to just set a Malice Trap from your deck or grave, which is great because the White Rabbit will set from deck, and then the White Binder can set from grave as well. So if you have to use like a GWC early on, you can always go ahead and reset it, which is really strong. You want to make sure that you have that or a Bishful in rotation to set up your links for the follow-up turn, but we'll get to that. And then also on summon the White Binder, we'll go ahead and just banish cards out of either grave up to 3, which is also really good because it's either an interruption for you or it can reset up all your monsters by banishing out your other Link monsters and getting them back to the board. Alternatively, you can banish things like White Rabbit on your opponent's turn to get a new trap card set as well, which is also pretty strong. Then you have Cryptor, which returns a banished Maliss card and then non-targeting banishes a card in the field, which is also very strong. You'll see that this is a shared effect with things like MTP, which gives you a really strong end board that is usually in layers. Now, as for the field spell, this card's really strong. You can bell it because it does banish from your hand, deck, or graveyard. So if you bell on activation of the Underground, it will send it to the graveyard, but it does say you can only activate one, so you can go ahead and activate a new one if it does get belled. The other thing here is that you can only target Maliss Link monsters for attacks, which is really cool while this is live. Then if all of your traps for Maliss are banished, you can go ahead and have all of your Maliss Link monsters gain 3,000 attacks. So imagine the Cryptor is already doubled, and then it's going to be gaining 3,000. That's pretty crazy, and it's a lot of value. Your Cryptor is the only way to recycle your banished cards, so that's a big thing that you want to keep in mind, that if you have access to keep putting back like your trap cards, that's going to be a sequencing thing. Let's say you have to use like an MTP early on, now it's banished with like a white binder, you can put it back with Cryptor, so on your opponent's turn you can go ahead and reset the MTP with like a white rabbit, right? So there's a lot of nuance in the gameplay and a lot of very technical lines, but you got to be on top of that. One thing that I heard about the trap cards that I thought was really cool is that the GWC06, TB11, and MTP07 all refer to chapter names in the actual books, so that's pretty cool. GWC06 will allow you to gain life if there's a Maliss Link monster on your board at resolution of this trap card. The TB11 will allow you to go ahead and summon a Maliss from deck, and then if your opponent controls 3 or more cards, you can summon a Maliss from your extra deck. Whatever you summon off this card will be negated and cannot attack that turn. This is a really awful effect on the second part because you're almost never summoning anything out of your extra deck because it is negated and cannot attack, which is not the best. And I know that you can use it on the next turn, but at the same point, it's not really going to do you any good because of the fact that the card's not properly summoned. So if you want to get it back on the board, you got to put it back in the extra deck, and then you got to summon it out. So definitely very awkward, but TB11, very good card, being able to get your monsters out of deck. And again, even if you summon out like a main deck monster, it still will be negated and cannot attack. The MTP07, on resolution of this one, if you control a Maliss Link monster on the board, then you are going to be able to non-targeting banish a card. Now, as for GWC and MTP, they both have a separate effect from just the resolution effect. The GWC is going to allow you to special summon a Maliss that is banished or in your grave, and the MTP is going to allow you to add a Maliss. And you want to make sure that you have a good resource game, because especially MTP, if you can't add, you can't banish. So that's a really big one to note. These all activate as a cost to banish your monster. So if they're set that turn and you activate one, you have to banish a Maliss for cost. And that's a big deal because that's what helps you just go ahead and dodge things that are problematic. So if you have like a terraforming in hand and you don't have TB11 or MTP, you can go ahead and set terraforming, then like normal Dormouse effect. And a lot of times they're going to be really off put by using a Veiler and Imperium because they're like, do I want to waste this in case that trap card's live? Because it's going to help you dodge, right? GWC won't help you out in those situations because at the beginning of the game, there's nothing really to bring back, right? But if you hard open TB11 or MTP, you set it and then you normal Dormouse and then use the effect they Veiler you can just chain one of these trap cards, get it out of the way, summon another monster, or add a card, and then bring your monster back to the board, right? So, very strong overall. The trap cards are broken in this deck. They're very, very good. But let's talk about what you can play with the deck to make the deck even better. Now, as for your different engines, I understand that Shifter is not an engine, but it does change the build completely. If you are going to be playing Shifter, your options will change in the deck. Usually people are more apt to play things like Goldsark, Allure, and really lean heavy into the cards that kind of just lose to Lancia. But you also see some Striker cards in the builds that usually play Shifter. The builds are vastly different though. So that's one thing where I want to make sure that's just known, that if you are going to be playing a Shifter build, you can look up quite a few different ones. It's just going to not be playing like the Bishils, it's not going to be playing the Fiendsmith package. You might be on like the Cashier cards, but it's going to be vastly different. The Striker builds are going to be very efficient. They're going to have the ways to go into your Link 3s by having very minimal effort. Drone Kagari, Drone Normal Summon, Link 3, which is really good. Then you also have cards like Widow Anchor, which are pretty terrifying underneath a Teraherb because they do commit into them and it makes them even better. You also can side cards like Jamming Waves or Afterburner, which I think is really strong if you're going to be playing the Striker cards just so you have another target. I know I was talking to a friend about this, but you also could play things like Shark Cannon post side, just to make sure that you have another out for things like Paradise. Of course, the resident Striker player really likes the Striker cards in the deck, but there are other ways to play the deck. The Cashier cards fell off really hard. I don't blame anyone for not really playing them right now. Unicorn's really strong, but the cards themselves are pretty lackluster, and if you hard open something like Birth and not a name, it feels really bad. But like Fender and Unicorn are always going to be strong, and they're going to be more budget if anything, but they're just not as popular as they once were. The Bishil cards are probably the second most popular right now, Next format, a lot of people are going to be maining Droll or siding Droll, and I feel like that's going to be real rough if you're playing the Lubellion package. Still really strong. Lubellion beats the Maliss matchup a lot of times, but at the same point, I wouldn't be on these cards. I don't think the engine's very strong. I think overall the Fiendsmith engine is the best engine for the deck. Of course, it's Fiendsmith, right? And so it's going to be just like the godsend this format. But the reason being is that when you play these cards, you can't side these cards out at all. Like, you cannot slim down on them whatsoever post-side. Because if you get Lancioed, the Fiendsmith engine actually gives you something to do, right? So you can go into a Caesar, you can go into a Desiree, and you can set up like a small board, you can make a ransom and then get follow-up. There's so many things that you're allowed to do with the Fiendsmith engine where if they Lancio you, you're like, okay, I'm still going to make a board, right? Even if it's Caesar Dump Paradise, right? Like, that's fantastic, and that's more than you could ask for at that point. So, definitely helps you stay in the game, helps you grind through the game, and gives you more options post-side. Now, as for your end board options, I know a lot of people are really trying to decide if they want to play Packbit or Mirror Logic. Some people are siding Mirio and then just maining the Packbit. The Save Worm is always going to be standard for Terahertz. You just send that turn 1 all the time. But at the same point, I even cut the Packbit. Now I'm playing the Code of Soul in the main deck. And I feel like this is fine because it frees up a spot in the extra deck as well. And I'm playing 2 Binder in my personal list. I might be on Underworld Goddess at some point, but I think 2 Binder is really nice because it just gives you more of a flex option, especially because a lot of people don't see it coming, or if you run into like unicorns or something, it just gives you another option. But having the Packbit around is nice, it's a good card, but sometimes just a little win more. So for me, I did cut it. And Mirio, I've seen in the sideboards, if you're playing like Ulti Slayer, people are signing the 1 and 3 Ulti Slayer, which is perfectly fine. Most end boards will have Terahertz on it, but at the same point, there's going to be other options. This is a very common end board for Maliss. So essentially, you're going to be setting GWC. GWC is going to be reborning the White Binder. This will banish the White Rabbit, and then White Rabbit will reborn and set the MTP, and then the MTP can banish the White Rabbit and non-targeting banish card in the field. So not only is it follow-up, but it's also going to get you that banish, and then White Binder is going to be able to banish whatever it needs to besides the White Rabbit too, so it's another interruption. So you get multiple interruptions just off one GWC, and you do this all on your opponent's turn. Now, as for Nightmare Griffin, this card is going to be seeing some play right now. It's not going to be super common, but it is seeing a lot of plays. So that's one thing where if you are going to be concerned about a card like this, make sure that you have an out for it, whether you're playing like Droplet or Chalice or whatever you feel like is necessary. But just know that this card is starting to pop up on some end boards. Now, do not play Chaos Hunter. This is the worst option I've seen many people do. Do not summon Chaos Hunter against Maliss. People are maining Thrust, they are maining Talent. You will get punished by summoning this card, especially if they're playing the Fiendsmith cards and they do not care that it's there. A lot of the cards that I recommend right now, including Phantasme, which I know Phantasme shares a similar issue to the Chaos Hunter, but it does get you into your Lancia faster. There's going to be a lot of link monsters on your opponent's board, usually 2 or 3 that you can drop a Phantasme on. The second that you can dig for the Lancia is going to be the time where you can end your opponent's turn. So that's going to be really important to note. The Lancia is just the #1 overall counter for this deck. You drop Lancia, your opponent's in a really rough spot, right? So that's one thing where you want to keep that in mind. Lancia is very, very good against this deck. The other thing is Meows comes out in the next set. Card's really strong. It's the Molcharmy. You already know how Molcharmies are. They are insane when you have them, and you can just drop it, and your opponent can't really extend further without giving you a lot of draws. So it makes the day a lot easier against this deck. Ulti Slayer is really good to get rid of Terahertz. That's why I like Ghost Ogre a little bit more than Ulti Slayer, because that just kind of deals with it the same way, and you don't have to put an additional card into your deck where you're probably already maining something like a Ghost Ogre, right? You can also Bell the Underground, which is really nice. That's one thing where your opponent does use that to continue through Nibiru. So if you have Nibiru and you have Bell, usually you will win that game because you can go ahead and Bell the Underground once you Nibiru, because usually people will save the Underground until they get Nibiru'd, and then they'll use it to extend. The other thing is going to be, if you're going first against this deck, you can literally side Iron Wall, and that's just GG in the chat, and then all you have to do is interact with the Fiendsmith cards if they're on them. The other thing, too, is most of their Link monsters go, I need a Cypress Link monster, and if you have a Zombie World up, it is fairly awkward. So I like this card a lot, too. It's a very good budget option. If you need something that's going to be quick and good, it's either Iron Wall or Zombie World. Obviously, they're both very going first cards, but they're both very strong too. Now let's go over some very important rulings of this deck. So we have certain things in this game that are called unclassified effects. Now, Hearts of Cryptor is no different. Now, this card is very similar to like Rock of the Vanquisher or like Rusty Bardiche, that even when they're negated, you cannot link them off. This card has a very unique effect. Once this card is pointing to a card, it will not be able to be negated. So if you Dark Ruler, if you Imperm, if you Veiler a Hearts of Cryptor, and then a monster is now pointing to the Hearts of Cryptor, it's not negated. Like, it is, but it's not. Like, the card is blanked, but the effect will still resolve regardless. Because once it's pointing to a monster, it can't be negated. So the effect will go through. So that's a huge ruling to keep in mind. This is how this works, and this will come up for you. Now, as for Accesscode Talker, I just talked about this one recently, but I want to make sure that this is in this video and that you know that this is a thing. So Accesscode will banish a link monster from grave, and on resolution it will check the attribute as to which it's banishing, and then you won't be able to banish that attribute for the rest of the turn if an Accesscode is negated. And of course your opponent still needs a card in their board, but you can go Accesscode, banish a dark, banish a dark, banish a dark, and get rid of all of your link monsters, because on resolution it's negated and it's not checking for anything, right? So you can keep banishing the same attribute from your graveyard, which is pretty crazy. The only locks that we found in this deck so far are going to be the Maliss monsters. When they return to the board, you are locked into Link monsters. And then once you use Splash Mage, you are hard locked into Cyberus monsters. So that's something else to keep in mind, just because it's not just the extra deck, you are just locked into Cyberus. You do have a couple OTK buttons, which I find very strong. Accesscode's one, obviously, because you can banish your Link monsters in the graveyard and then use all the effects to bring them back to the board and just really put up damage. Your Terahertz gets gigantic with every send against 2500 attack, which is pretty crazy, and then it can also do one attack on monsters per attribute that the monster has already from sending different attributes. So if you send a light and an earth, then you have the light and the earth attribute as well, so you can keep attacking. So that's really strong. Terahertz also negates all the activated effects of your opponent's monsters in the battle phase, which is already very strong, especially if you're playing against something like Tenpai. And then Hearts of Cryptor, this card, attack, effect, banish itself, bring itself back, attack again with doubled attack, and then also gain 600 off the Dormouse effect. Now, which one do you main? I've always said that if you're playing against Maliss a lot, you should play Bell. If you're playing against the Ryziel deck, you should play Ogre. I think Ogre is just genuinely the mainstay right now. Ogre should be the one that you main, because Ogreing Terahertz is insane. Not only does it cut off access to Mirio, Packbit, and then turns off the Disable Room and Grave, you also can hit Duo Drive against Ryziel. So it's a very good generic card versus both matchups, and it kind of serves as like an ulti slayer anyways, because it just gets rid of the endboard problem. So let's talk about some deck lists. Here is a Fiendsmith build for Maliss. You'll see the 2-track that's really standard now. We're seeing a lot of the Allures and the Gold Sarks for consistency. I don't like playing these cards because they lose harder to Lancia, so post side, if you get Lancia, then your hand's even worse. And I know that Sign Up Mining's not exactly the way to go, but at least that way you don't lose as hard to Lancia, and you have other options, because you can even add cards like Code of Soul and at least have an extender that way. So the Bishos are also going to be very common here, but 3 Druisworm is a little excessive. I would say if you're going to be running Druisworm at 2, you should at least run 1 Baldric with it. Baldric's a very strong card right now. You should run it. We are seeing the Griffin in the extra deck, but no Caesar. Also very interesting choices. So definitely a few different things here that we're going to be seeing in the different deck lists that will vary from week to week as we start getting the deck a little bit more ironed out. 3 Chessie, you'll see that card move around so much in different lists from 1 to 3. I personally like 2 right now. I don't like 3. I think it's the worst one. It is nice to have a name that you can top deck and then be able to at least start your combo, or be able to pair with like the Striker cards or even the Fiendsmith cards, because it can just be like your 1 Maliss monster and 2 other monsters into dueling 3. So definitely very interesting, but you're going to see a lot of the ratios kind of move up and down. We're also seeing a lot of lists that are not playing many hand traps at all right now. Here's another list that's a little bit more pure, no shifter in the main deck. We're seeing Code of Soul, a lot of hand traps, some Sign Up Minings, and then we're seeing the Heat Soul, which I like Heat Soul a lot, because if you get Lancia, at least you can keep drawing cards like the Nibiru's. If you're on Impulse, which is really common right now, Impulse, you can drawing into your Veilers. Just cards that allow you to not die that turn. and you're actually able to progress a little further, right? So I think that's nice in the sense that you at least get cards to make sure that you can play through the Lancia a little bit better, and even draw your own Lancia if you're in the mirror, right? One Chessie here. I was really adamant about one Chessie, but then I decided that it's really awkward when you don't have another name in deck, because you need to have at least one or two in deck at all times, because you'll find in your grind game that it becomes a little bit more awkward if you can't get to like Cryptor and start recycling cards. So 2 has been the perfect ratio for me, but use whatever works for you. And we'll go on to our third list now. And again, you're seeing the thrust in the main a little bit more, which I'm not a fan of. I really don't think that it's that smart to do that. And not seeing any ashes for like Fuas, not seeing Nibiru's, it's a little awkward because it's not something that we're really used to. Playing the Allures, the Eclipse, I like Eclipse a lot in the main. I think that card should be in the main deck. The D-Berry in the main deck is a choice. Impulse is definitely a very interesting card. We're seeing it a lot right now. It turns off your Firewall and Dotscaper, so keep that in mind. They're not like the end of the world scenarios to have those turned off, but it is kind of awkward when that does happen. 2 Chessie, which of course, again, for me at least, that's just the correct number. And then we're seeing the Allures and the Gold Sark. So a lot of consistency with a certain amount of cards in each deck list, usually about like 1 Mag and 2 Druis. I still like Baldrake. It's getting cut a lot lately, but it's really strong because especially if you get like Nibiru, you can go ahead and drop Baldrake and then you contribute the token for the Baldrake, which is really good, and be able to just threaten a monster that gets summoned. Baldrake becomes a little bit worse if you're playing against a lot of Maliss, so that's one thing too where I could see that being a thing. But if you're playing against like Ryzeo and there's something like a duo drive, you can just go ahead and banish it, right? So makes things a little better. Even if it's like a detonator, you can banish it. So really, really strong. Something just to keep in mind. I do hope that you enjoyed today's video, and I hope that you learned a lot, because the deck can be very frustrating to play against and to play. So if you haven't already started following my Twitter, Twitch, my Instagram, or join my Discord, definitely go ahead and do so, and then also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I appreciate all of you, and I hope that you all have a great day, and I'll catch you on the next video. Later.